Hello everyone, welcome to the MAD podcast on YouTube. This is mergers, acquisitions and deals, and we're talking with entrepreneurs that share their case studies of how they sourced, structured and closed deals. Now in today's episode 13, we have Giles Button. He's a very experienced turnaround expert. And in this episode, he's going to be sharing his experience of turning around a business from non-profitable to profitable. I hope you'll enjoy the episode. Don't forget to subscribe below, hit that notifications bell, and you'll get the latest episodes as they are released on YouTube. And don't forget, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Enjoy the episode with Giles Button. Hello everyone and welcome to the MAD podcast. This is the place where we showcase case studies from entrepreneurs explaining how they source, structure and close deals. And today's guest, I'm very proud to welcome Giles Button. Hello Giles.
Hi Sean, thanks for having me on your show.
Well, it's great that you're here, and I know you've got an interesting case study that you're going to share with us today. So, but before we, before we dive into it, can you please tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background, please?
Certainly, Sean. So my background is I was classically trained in physics and business studies, went into the field of telecoms as a systems administrator, then into marketing and managing resellers around Europe. From that, I wanted to start up my own business. I'd been involved in an advertising agency. So we set up a web design agency and spent 10 years making every mistake possible in building a business. Got it to a good point, and then we had to do a bit of a turnaround, which I'll talk about later. And then the last 10 years, I've been helping other people and doing business turnarounds.
Okay, and you kind of alluded to some elements of what we're going to be talking about today, because there's a bit of a different format, I would suggest, in that we're going to be talking about a business that you've already owned and how you essentially turned us around. So would you like to just tell us how you got started with this business and what sector it was in?
Sure. So I started in an advertising design agency, and they were getting a lot of requests. This was way back in '99. Lots of requests for websites. It was the new thing. And so we decided to set up an agency doing that. So we started up and we made one of the classic mistakes of we did everything for anybody at any price. So we were doing everything to do with digital marketing, websites, SEO, search engine optimization, email marketing, etc., etc. And for a few years, we built up quite a young team, but we were really busy fools. And looking back, we were trying to do, we were trying to be all things to all people, and we weren't very good at measuring profitability. So it took about 10 years in that business to really get it to a place where it was making money, it was profitable, and we'd specialized by that point in e-commerce. So we're just doing e-commerce solutions. We had gently let go some of our challenging customers, which was definitely a lesson, and started really focusing on where we were good. So we cut down our services. Unfortunately, all that learning had come at a cost, and it come at a sort of a personal cost, personal business, financial challenges, but also we had debts. And we got to the point where we were basically swimming upstream. So we were quite a good swimmer by that point, but the current was strong. And so we had to look at alternative ways to turn the business around.
Okay, so and it's a common issue, I think, isn't it? That I think there's a fear amongst business owners that unless they open their doors to everyone, they just don't want to turn any business away, or and think that's the perfect strategy. And in some cases, maybe it works, but I think what you're saying is, and perhaps you could confirm this, is it better to start out as a niche business?
Yeah, there's some really great books on it. But I do believe that you need to find that kind of sweet spot between what differentiates you in the market, what are customers actually really looking for, and what are you good at providing. And that's different for everybody. And I think, if you look at some of the really amazing success stories in the last decade of the Amazon, the Googles of the world, they all did the same. Google started as just a search engine, and yet it's become this mammoth company. Amazon was a book seller.
That's right. Yeah.
And that was it. And it's the same thing. So yeah, my experience was it is better to niche down, get good at that, build up a nice, profitable business, work out how to duplicate what you're doing. So another lesson I had was all about systemization. I think we'll talk about that later in terms of how when I tried to sell the business, the lessons I learned.
Yeah. So if you were starting out again now, would it be e-commerce? Is that the one you'd go for?
I think, yeah, e-commerce is big, obviously, with the last year with the pandemic. There's been a huge change in retail, and in many respects, I would love to be back in that sector, as it would be. I can imagine it's very busy, and it's something that, like a lot of industries that are very young, a lot of people say they can do it, but it's often done very badly. And yeah, there's a real difference between the good and the bad suppliers.
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I just heard about a business just a couple of days ago, and it's not e-commerce per se, but it was a butcher's business, and they package and send through the post, various meats, chicken, or beef, all this kind of stuff. And their business has gone absolutely crazy the last 12 months, From doing just a few hundred, they're now doing thousands around the UK. I mean, it's incredible. So I hear what you're saying when you say, because of the pandemic, some businesses are booming, but many aren't. And they're just, I'm in construction. It's a little bit slower than it was, but it's still moving, it's still operating and active. So yeah, I hear what you're saying about e-commerce. So what kind of clients did you have in that sector?
So they were mostly SMEs. We were based in the Midlands, so it was based around the Midlands. We'd deliberately taken the conscious decision to avoid the kind of big London companies. And we called ourselves a second generation e-commerce supplier. So they were typically companies that had been selling online for a couple of years. They were doing okay at it, and they wanted to take it to the next level. And that's where we really excelled. So we didn't deal with startups. That was another of our filters. They had to be established e-commerce businesses. Typically, it was part of a well-established company. And these would be businesses doing from 10 to 100 orders a day, right up to several thousand orders a day. So, millions of pounds turnover online.
Wow. I'm curious why you didn't work with startups. Is that because they, generally speaking, don't have any cash?
It's not so much the cash. It's my experience of startups, and I found this my own personal experience, is you tend to meander down a river with a lot of changes in the first 12 months. And it gets back to this idea of most startups start trying to be all things to all men or all people, and they gradually focus that. So if you're trying to build them a website, they will start off saying we want X, and then they want X plus Y, and then they don't want the X, but they want the Z, etc. So
yeah, they can be challenging clients, I think is what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so can you give us some perspective on, you went through this process, you were kind of generic, and then you kind of became a specialist. Can you give us some numbers to give us an idea of the improvements and the value that you added through that process, I guess?
Yeah, so we went from a loss-making company right up to about 20% net profit. So we were doing six figures, not quite $1 million turnover, but we hit a nice healthy profit by the end. It was just a case of the previous debt burden that was the problem. So as most people will know on this podcast, it's turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. We were generating a profit, but we were having to use all of that to pay off debts, and that's where we became a cropper.
Yeah, sure. And at some point you made a decision to sell this business, or to certainly think about selling. What was that moment? What was the reason for that?
So we'd gone through several steps. We'd got to the point where we were swimming upstream, and we were going to go bust. So we had to do something about it. And we went through a CVA, a company voluntary administration, or creditor's voluntary arrangement, sorry. And we restructured the company. Unfortunately, in hindsight, that was the wrong move. We still had way too much debt, and it was expensive. So we ended up doing what's called a pre-pack administration. We bought the assets and the customers from that business into a new business. And we had a lovely, profitable business, and we did a lot of restructuring. But I'd found personally that something, after sort of 10 years of really slogging away at this business, and at one point, having nothing to show for it, that something changed in me, and I lost the love for that business a little bit. So it suddenly became profitable, and actually that was probably partly why I was less emotionally attached to the business. And so after a couple of years, I decided to try and sell it. And we used to do some work with other agencies. So I naturally approached some agencies and said, would you be interested in buying it? And that's when I discovered about the challenges of being an owner-managed business. And the business was quite complex. It wasn't very well systematized. It was depending on me as the owner. And all of those factors meant that the value was difficult to show. And it was very dependent on me as the owner. So that was my first inroads into selling a business. And it was a very different experience. It wasn't something I'd done before. And so I wasn't looking at it from the buyer's perspective. And that was definitely something that I learned. You really need to remove yourself as the owner from the business, and then you can maximize the valuation at exit.
Yeah, for sure. So, so what was the next step then?
So I gradually started simplifying things. I had a mentor many years ago that said to me, only do what only you can do. So I started outsourcing bits of the business that we weren't great at. For example, in our world, it was hosting, very technical side of the business. We started outsourcing that to a partner. And I started systemizing the business. We also started outsourcing some of the work. And that created a much simpler model. We focused even more on one platform in e-commerce rather than two. And it was at that point I was able to sell off chunks of the business rather than the whole business as a going concern. That process took too long. And by the time we got to kind of where it was better to sell it off in bits.
Yeah, and it was a gradual thing, so as opposed to a big thump.
Yeah.
And you don't so you eventually sold all of it, did you?
Yeah, so we eventually sold all of it. We then closed that business down from everything that we'd sold off. And sort of in that time, I'd started to get asked about my turnaround experience. And so I started to get involved in some other business turnaround projects of people that had got into a similar stressful situation, shall we say.
Yeah, for sure. I sometimes think, Giles, that your experience on this, sharing your knowledge and experience of things that haven't gone right, but you've managed to pull self through, is so valuable to our audience, because there'll be some listeners in that situation now, and by listening to this, you'd be able to help them and support them. So what was the first? Can you share one of your projects that you've helped someone else to turn around the business?
Absolutely. Obviously, with turnarounds, you're bound slightly with an NDA, so I can't talk too specifically.
Sure.
But there were a couple of key things that we learned. The first thing is, and I learned this from my own experience, an owner in that sort of stressed situation has often tried everything that they can think of. And sometimes they are really rabbits in the headlight. They just don't know what to do. They're fighting fire all day long, and they can't take that step back. They're very emotionally attached to the business, to the staff. They often have personal guarantees on debt. And so it's very difficult to make the decision. And so really my role as an outside counsel is to completely take a detached view and to really look at the numbers unemotionally and come up with a plan. And the first thing to assess is this business a going concern? Is there a profitable business here somewhere if we make some changes, or if we got rid of the debt, or those sorts of changes? Is there a profitable model there for the owner? And then what does the owner want to do? Where do they want to get to? And often an owner just wants out. They want to kind of cut their losses. But you can, in a turnaround, might be 4 to 6 months. Actually, sometimes the owner's re-energized and they want to sort of continue the running the business at that point.
I think once the seed it starts to get some traction and turn around, they start to feel good about themselves because they're taking positive action, and they can
Absolutely.
see getting, and then the kind of love comes back, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're right, and you're right, Sean. It is about taking action, and as the old adage says, any decision is better than no decision, and that is the case. In a turnaround, you need to go in, you need to take big action, you need to move swiftly, and you need to start talking to the creditors. And that's probably the biggest thing that I learned was, be honest with the creditors and what you can achieve. And it won't be what they want to hear. And you might be offering them a tiny return on their debt, but actually it's better to tell them and be upfront, and they will try and negotiate with it. And to be quite honest, I'll tell them I've come up with a plan. This is what's achievable, and this is all that's achievable. And it's better to do that than to try and bend and then disappoint them later, because then your credibility is destroyed. And they've probably found that the owner's been hiding from them or disappointed them on several occasions. So it's really important that you go in with a very realistic plan, even if it's not what they want to hear.
Yeah, I've been in debt twice. What would be, classed as significant debt, and it is stressful. It's a bit of a living nightmare, to be honest. But as you said, if you approach your creditors like I did and just negotiate with them what's affordable, just for a period of time, to give you that breathing space to then be able to start making decisions about how to restructure your business. And so that's the first step, would you say, is speaking to your creditors?
Yeah, I'd say first of all, you need a plan. You need to have a plan that you're confident in, that creates a profitable model. I would also suggest that you're going to want to show that you've made changes. It's no good going to creditor and saying, we've come up with a new idea or a new product, or we're just about to win a contract. Creditors want to feel that they're sharing the pain with you. So if you can, it is a horrible process, but perhaps you would let some staff go, or you're going to reduce your expenses. That that big office, can you make it smaller? You've perhaps had to get rid of an expensive car, or anything that you can demonstrate that you've made that painful change, and therefore you're 100% behind the plan. Then you're much more credible with a creditor to say, okay, here is the plan. This is what we can achieve. And let's work together on achieving that, and kind of paint the future picture. What it's going to be like in the future, and why the creditor should continue to want to work with you.
Okay. So in regards to the case study, how did that end?
So it was a wholesale business. It was literally, so I went in on Friday afternoon. We spent all weekend working with the owners on coming up with a plan, the necessary changes. We did unfortunately have to close one of the sites and relocate some of the staff, and unfortunately let some of the staff go, which is always the last thing that you want to do. But it was what was necessary to protect some, rather than everybody losing out. And I think that's another lesson that's important for an owner to look at, that most owners will try and protect the staff, and that's the right thing to do. But sometimes if you're trying to protect 30 jobs, sometimes it's better to unfortunately let 5 go and keep 25. So it was straight in there. We spent the first couple of weeks just assessing the business, talking to the creditors with the plan. They'd had a factoring arrangement, and that had been pulled from them. So that was a very massive dent on their cash flow. So we had to show the finance company that this was the plan. And so we had to refinance the business. We managed to do that in the first 3 weeks, just in time for the payroll. And we then set about systemizing and making the business more efficient. And that's where you get into methodologies like EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system. I'm a big fan of. Start to implement that, and then we could see a route to exit. The other thing that was crucial was to get in front of the customers, talk to the customers, reassure them. They're often at that stage in the business that they've often started to see problems happening. So you need to really focus on which are the profitable customers. And although it seems very strange, sometimes the best thing to do in a turnaround is to cut some of your customers, because they're just time drains, they're resource drains. And actually by cutting some customers, you can often cut bigger expenses. So within the 3 to 4 month period, we were able to turn around. We took it from losing about 15% to kind of 5% profit. And we were then able to exit the business and sell it on to somebody within that industry.
Okay, brilliant. Sounds really great. And okay, so did you say you had another case study of a turnaround?
Yeah, so I would say another case study was in looking at a business. It wasn't distressed, it had just hit a ceiling. So quite common at certain kind of points. This was a business hitting around the sort of 3 to 4 million turnover. It had grown nicely and then got stuck at that kind of level. They were growing turnover, but they just couldn't be profitable. And they felt they were profitable, but the classic sign that you could see was that they were increasing their debt. And that's the first thing that I look at. What's the cash position of the business? If it's not cash generating, it's in real trouble. And another thing that you could quickly look at was the number of employees versus the turnover. So I always look at a ratio of a business should be doing 100 to 150,000 pounds of turnover for each employee. And if it's below that, then there's definitely some inefficiencies. So we were able to go in. That was a slightly longer term project. So that was one where we implemented the EOS system. We took them through one of their tools. They're called an accountability chart, which looks at who do you need in the business. We did some debt restructuring with the CBIL loans. They had some very expensive debt. And then we really looked at their kind of target customers. And again, we moved them away from trying to win business at any cost and in any sector to really focusing on their ideal customer and who that was.
Brilliant. Sounds really great. And Giles, your experience of IT marketing and your turnaround experience, I know there were lots of people listening to this podcast. What kind of opportunities would you say you're looking for right now?
That's a good question, Sean. So the way I look at it is a good fit with a person. So if I'm working with a partner, I know my strengths and I know my weaknesses. If you look at certain models, you often find that entrepreneurs are very big picture people. They're great. They've got 100 ideas every day. They love kind of relationships. They're often very good at sales. They're good at the big picture, but they really hate, or they get very frustrated by the detail behind the business. And actually that's my expertise, is the numbers, beautiful things like cash flow forecasts, operations, systemizing the business. So when I'm looking for partners, I'm looking for that kind of fit. Somebody that is the big thinker, the visionary, that has the plan and the client side, and I can then bring to them the operational side, is where I fit.
Okay, so the entrepreneurs maybe front of house, so to speak, and your back office. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, that's a good description. And in terms of when we're looking at businesses, I'm somebody that likes to dig into the numbers, to look at the kind of valuation model. So again, it may be somebody that's really great at building connections and talking to owners that are looking to sell a business, but they don't like doing the numbers, and I'm a numbers man.
Yeah, a numbers man. I like that. So would you say you're sector agnostic, or is there only specific types of sectors that you want to work in?
I'd say there's definitely sectors that I'm much more experienced in. IT businesses, whether it's hardware, software, SaaS businesses. Agencies is another sector I look at, marketing, digital, print, design, and then what I'd call business services. So businesses where they might have a specialist end product, so they might go and service something, but they'll have a bunch of employees and they'll have an operations function. So that's what I look at: business services, IT, and agencies.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, I'm sure you'll get people contacting you on that basis. Now, I always ask for some words of wisdom for budding investors that are looking to dive into buying businesses or even turning them around if they've got their own. So what kind of information would you want to share with them? What kind of advice would you share with those people?
That's a great question, Sean. So kind of a couple of tips that I'd say is, if you're looking to buy a business but you've never run a business, find somebody that has, because you don't want to be learning about how to run a business and learning a new business. The second thing, as I'd say, is if you come across a business, or if you are in a business that has built up debt, take action soon, and take big action. Don't just try and chip away at it. The next thing I'd say is when you're looking at a business, or if you're running a business, it's really important that you work on the business. We've all heard the expression work on the business, not in the business. And it's very difficult to do when you're a hands-on entrepreneur. But I would really say how important it is to take one day a week away from the business and really work on the business. It will give you a really good clarity. And that's the time to spend on systemizing a business. So those would be my top tips.
Well, that's brilliant, Giles. Well, thank you very much for sharing your case studies and your wisdom on today's podcast. How can people get hold of the numbers man, Giles Button?
So to get hold of me, you can look me up on LinkedIn, Giles Button, or my website is gilesbutton.co.uk. That's Giles with a G and Button as in Cadbury's.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks again, and I'm really glad you came along today and shared your case to this. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Great to talk.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Giles. He really is a turnaround expert, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more from him very soon. Now, don't forget to subscribe below, hit that notifications bell. You'll get the latest videos regarding mergers, acquisitions, and deals as they are released. Now, our next episode is with high-profile entrepreneur James Sinclair. And he has a very specific niche in the family entertainment sector, and he'll be sharing some of his case studies with us very soon. So watch out for that. And don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn if you haven't done already, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.